The battlefield inferno. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp tang of burning metal. Explosions echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath Ethan Cole as he lay on his back, staring up at the orange-streaked sky. His breathing was ragged, every inhale a struggle against the pain radiating from his abdomen. Blood seeped through the cracks in his armor, pooling around him on the dirt-strewn ground. Ethan had been part of a reconnaissance mission. A simple one, or so they had been told. Just sneak into enemy territory, gather data, and return. But nothing had gone as planned. The enemy forces had ambushed them with a ferocity no one had anticipated. His team had been wiped out in minutes. Now he was the last one left, broken and abandoned on this alien battlefield. As he struggled to stay conscious, the sounds of battle grew fainter. His vision blurred, the edges of the world dimming. He thought of his family back on Earth, his younger sister waiting for him to return, his mother's worried face when he last said goodbye. Was this how it all ended? Alone on a planet light years from home. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the quiet. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Ethan's body tensed despite his injuries. His hand instinctively reached for the sidearm holstered at his hip, but his fingers barely grazed the weapon before falling limp. He was too weak to fight. Through the haze of his failing vision, he saw a figure emerge from the smoke. It wasn't human. Towering at least 9 feet tall, the creature had a broad, muscular frame covered in a sleek, gray-blue exoskeleton that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its long limbs moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, and its eyes, large and glowing faintly, locked onto him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Ethan's mind raced. This was it. The enemy had found him, and they were going to finish the job. He tried to lift his arm, to shout, to do anything, but his body refused to obey. He was completely at the mercy of this alien. The creature crouched beside him, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw concern. Its glowing eyes softened as it examined his wounds. It made a low, resonant sound, almost like a hum. Ethan wanted to believe it was speaking, but he couldn't understand. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to resist, but he was too far gone. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of attacking, the alien reached out with a hand that dwarfed his chest. Its touch was surprisingly gentle. It pressed a strange metallic device against his wounds. A sharp pain shot through Ethan's body, making him gasp, but the bleeding stopped almost instantly. His head spun as the alien continued working with calm precision, applying what looked like a biogel to seal his injuries. What are you doing?" Ethan croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The alien didn't respond. It simply glanced at him, its gaze unreadable, before lifting him effortlessly into its arms. Ethan tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come. His body was limp, like a ragdoll, as the alien carried him away from the battlefield. Through the haze of pain and confusion, Ethan caught glimpses of their surroundings. The battlefield was a wasteland, littered with the wreckage of ships and the bodies of soldiers, both human and alien. Fires burned in scattered patches, casting flickering shadows across the ground. The alien moved quickly, its long strides covering ground at an incredible pace. Ethan's mind teetered on the edge of consciousness. Why was it helping him? Was this some kind of trap? He didn't have the strength to dwell on the questions. All he could do was watch as the alien carried him into the unknown. After what felt like hours, they reached a hidden cave tucked into the side of a jagged cliff. The alien ducked low to enter, the narrow entrance giving way to a surprisingly spacious interior. The cave was dimly lit by bioluminescent plants clinging to the walls, casting an eerie blue-green glow. The alien gently set Ethan down on a makeshift bed of soft moss. It worked quickly, removing pieces of his broken armor and examining his injuries again. Ethan flinched as it applied more of the biogel, but the pain was duller now, as if the device it had used earlier had numbed his body. Why? Why are you doing this?" Ethan mumbled, his voice hoarse. The alien paused, tilting its head as if considering his words. Then it pointed to itself and made a strange, fluid gesture with its hands. Ethan couldn't understand, but there was no malice in its movements. If anything, the alien seemed protective. His eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling him into darkness. As he drifted off, one thought lingered in his mind. This creature could have left him to die, or worse, killed him outright. But it hadn't. For some reason, it had saved him. And Ethan was determined to find out why. The cave sanctuary. Ethan's consciousness flickered back slowly, his mind swimming through a fog of pain and confusion. The last thing he remembered was the battlefield, a cacophony of explosions, the screams of dying soldiers. And then, her, that towering alien figure with glowing eyes and gentle hands. His first instinct was panic. He bolted upright, or at least tried to, but his body protested with a sharp jolt of pain. The world spun, and he fell back onto a surprisingly soft surface. The faint scent of moss filled his nostrils, and the cool, damp air brushed against his skin. He wasn't dead. Not yet, anyway. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing the strange surroundings. The walls of the cave shimmered faintly, covered in what looked like glowing blue-green vines that pulsed gently, like veins carrying life. Pools of clear water reflected the light, creating a serene, otherworldly atmosphere. For a moment, he could almost forget the chaos he had escaped. Almost. Then he saw her. The alien mother stood at the edge of the cave, her massive frame illuminated by the faint bioluminescent glow. She was tending to a smaller figure, another alien, this one no taller than Ethan's waist. It had the same gray-blue exoskeleton, but its movements were clumsier, almost childlike. The larger alien handed the child a piece of glowing fruit, murmuring in a series of low, melodic tones that Ethan couldn't understand but somehow felt soothing. Ethan's breath caught. She had a child. This was no soldier, no war machine. She was a mother. The realization sent his mind spinning. Why had she saved him? What could she possibly gain from helping a human soldier, the enemy in this unrelenting war? He shifted slightly, testing his body, and winced. His wounds had been treated. The bleeding stopped and his skin sealed with some kind of translucent gel. The memory of her hands working quickly, yet gently, flashed through his mind. The movement must have caught her attention. She turned, her glowing eyes meeting his. Ethan froze, his instincts screaming at him to do something, run, fight, anything. But she didn't approach. Instead, she tilted her head, a slow, deliberate motion, as though studying him. Hi," Ethan croaked, his voice hoarse and dry. He instantly felt ridiculous. What was he expecting? That she would suddenly start speaking fluent English. She didn't respond verbally. Instead, she pointed at him with one long, clawed finger, then gestured toward a shallow bowl beside him. Inside was some sort of liquid, clear and faintly glowing. Ethan hesitated. Was it water? Something else? She made the gesture again, slower this time, as if coaxing a frightened animal. Her posture remained relaxed, non-threatening, but there was an undeniable power in the way she moved. Ethan's eyes flicked to the child, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. With no better options, Ethan reached for the bowl, his fingers trembling. The liquid felt cool and slightly viscous as he brought it to his lips. He took a cautious sip. To his surprise, it tasted sweet, like honey mixed with fresh spring water. Almost instantly, a warm, soothing sensation spread through his body, dulling the ache in his muscles. "Thanks," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. The alien mother seemed satisfied. She made another sound, a soft hum that resonated in the cave, then turned her attention back to the child. Ethan watched as she gently brushed a clawed hand over the child's head, her movements so tender they reminded him of his own mother tucking him in as a child. The scene stirred something deep within him. This alien, this giant of a creature who could easily crush him, was just a mother, a protector. And for some reason, she had chosen to protect him too. Ethan's curiosity grew stronger than his fear. "Why?" he said aloud, his voice still weak but steady. "Why did you save me?" She glanced at him again, tilting her head as if she understood the question but lacked the means to answer. She placed her hand on her chest, tapping it twice, then gestured to him, mimicking the motion. It wasn't much, but Ethan grasped the intention. A connection. He pointed to himself. "Ethan," he said slowly. Then he pointed to her, raising an eyebrow. The alien hesitated, then made a series of sounds that Ethan couldn't hope to replicate. Her voice was deep, almost musical, with tones that resonated in his chest. He decided to give her a name himself. "Lyra," he said softly. "I'll call you Lyra." She didn't react negatively, so he took that as a small victory. The child made a chirping sound, drawing his attention. It was looking at him with wide, curious eyes, and for the first time, Ethan felt something other than fear. He smiled weakly and raised a hand in a small wave. The child mimicked the gesture, its tiny hand moving awkwardly. For the first time since the mission had gone wrong, Ethan felt a spark of hope. He didn't know why Lyra had saved him, but as he lay there, watching the alien family, he realized one thing. She wasn't just protecting her child. She was protecting him too. And whatever her reasons, Ethan wasn't about to waste the second chance she had given him. A fragile alliance. Ethan leaned back against the cool stone wall of the cave, his thoughts a chaotic storm of questions. The alien mother, Lyra, as he decided to call her, moved with silent efficiency, checking on her child, and occasionally glancing at him with those glowing, inscrutable eyes. Despite her imposing size, her presence was oddly calming, though Ethan couldn't quite bring himself to relax. He had to admit, she could have left him to die on the battlefield. Worse, she could have ended his life herself. But she hadn't. And now he was here, in this strange sanctuary, sharing space with a being who was supposed to be his enemy. "Okay, Ethan," he muttered to himself, trying to make sense of it all. "She saved you. But why?" His musings were interrupted when Lyra suddenly stood, her head brushing the top of the cave's high ceiling. She moved to a small pile of scavenged items in the corner, pieces of metal, wires, and glowing alien tech that looked far beyond anything Ethan had seen in his years of military service. She picked up a device and began working on it with quick, precise movements, her large hands handling the delicate components with surprising finesse. Ethan watched in silence, unsure whether to speak or just let her be. The child, meanwhile, had taken an interest in him. It shuffled closer, its large, curious eyes studying him like he was some kind of fascinating specimen. Ethan offered a small, tentative smile. "Hey there, little guy," he said softly. The child chirped in response, tilting its head. "Encourage," Ethan pointed to himself. "Ethan," he said slowly, tapping his chest. The child mimicked the gesture, tapping its own chest and letting out a series of clicks and hums. Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. "I guess that's your name, huh? Not sure I can pronounce that." Their interaction was cut short by a sharp noise from Lyra. She had turned to face them, her posture tense. Her glowing eyes flicked to the cave entrance, and her elongated ears twitched, straining to catch something Ethan couldn't hear. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra didn't answer, not that he expected her to. Instead, she moved to the entrance in long, deliberate strides, her head cocked to the side as if scanning for threats. The child chirped nervously and scurried behind her, clinging to one of her legs. Ethan's heart began to race. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground. Not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. He strained to hear what had spooked her, but the only sound was the faint dripping of water from the cave walls. Then he heard it, a faint, mechanical whirring, growing louder with every passing second. "Drones," he whispered, his stomach sinking. The enemy must have sent patrols to track down survivors. If they found this place, It wouldn't just be his life on the line. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. She gestured sharply toward the back of the cave, where a narrow tunnel disappeared into darkness. Ethan hesitated, not wanting to leave her and the child behind, but the urgency in her movements made it clear this wasn't a request. "No way," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not running while you." Lyra cut him off with a low growl, pointing more insistently at the tunnel. Her message was clear: protect yourself. Protect the child. Before he could argue further, the whirring grew deafening. A single drone floated into view, its sleek black surface gleaming under the dim light of the cave. It scanned the area with a bright red sensor, emitting a high-pitched beep as it detected movement. Lyra didn't hesitate. In a blur of motion, she leaped at the drone, her claws slicing through its casing with ease. Sparks flew as it crumpled to the ground, but the damage was done. The noise would draw more of them. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the pain in his body. Lyra turned to him, her gaze fierce, and pointed at the child. "I get it," he said, nodding. "I'll keep them safe." The child chirped in protest as Ethan scooped them up, but there was no time to argue. With one last look at Lyra, he sprinted toward the tunnel, clutching the child tightly. Behind him, he heard the unmistakable sound of more drones arriving, and Lyra's roar as she prepared to fight them off. The tunnel was narrow and winding, the walls pressing in on either side. Ethan's heart pounded as he ran, the child's small hands gripping his arm. He could only hope Lyra would be okay, that she would find a way to escape. Finally, the tunnel opened into a larger cavern, dimly lit by the same bioluminescent plants. Ethan set the child down, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We're safe for now," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. The child looked up at him, its large eyes glistening with fear. Ethan knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on its shoulder. "She'll be okay," he said, more to himself than the child. "She's tough. She'll find us." But as he sat there, waiting for a sound, any sound that would signal Lyra's return, a heavy weight settled in his chest. For the first time, he realized just how fragile this alliance truly was, and how much was now at stake. Enemy of the gates. The silence in the cave was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of distant machinery. Ethan crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of rock, his eyes darting toward the faint light filtering through the narrow cave entrance. He held his breath, clutching a crude weapon. Nothing more than a broken piece of alien metal, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Lyra stood tall, her glowing eyes fixed on the entrance, her body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The child clung to her leg, silent but trembling. Ethan's heart pounded as he glanced at Lyra. She hadn't spoken a word, not that he would understand her if she had, but her movements conveyed everything. The enemy had found them. The sound of boots echoed through the narrow passage outside the cave, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't just drones this time. The enemy had sent soldiers. He could hear their guttural voices, barking orders in a language that made his skin crawl. They were close. Too close. Ethan tightened his grip on the makeshift weapon, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wasn't ready for this. His body still ached from his injuries, and his mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt. But there was no room for hesitation. If they found the cave, it was over. For him, for Lyra, and for the child. Lyra turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Ethan's. For a brief moment, he saw something in her eyes, an unspoken understanding, a shared determination. She wasn't just protecting her child anymore. She was protecting him too. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "We'll make it through this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The footsteps stopped just outside the cave. Ethan's muscles tensed as shadows danced across the walls, the enemy soldiers scanning the area with bright white lights. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and ozone, and the faint crackle of static from their comms made his nerves prickle. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his voice low and guttural. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. They were searching for something, or someone. Lyra didn't move. She remained perfectly still, her massive frame blending into the shadows. Ethan followed her lead, his breathing shallow, his body pressed against the cold rock. He prayed they would pass by, that the cave would remain hidden. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that easy. A sudden clatter shattered the silence. The child had shifted slightly, knocking over a small rock. The sound echoed through the cave like a gunshot, and Ethan's heart sank. The soldiers froze, their lights snapping toward the entrance. "Damn it," Ethan muttered under his breath. Before he could react, Lyra sprang into action. She moved with blinding speed, her massive form surging forward like a force of nature. The first soldier didn't even have time to scream before her claws tore through his weapon, sending it clattering to the ground. The second raised his rifle, but Lyra was faster, her powerful tail whipping around and knocking him off his feet. Ethan didn't have time to admire her skill. The other soldiers were pouring into the cave, their weapons trained on Lyra. He ducked low, darting toward the child, and pulling it behind a large rock. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. The cave erupted into chaos. Blinding flashes of light illuminated the dark space as the soldiers fired their weapons. Lyra was a blur of motion, her claws and tail cutting through the air with deadly precision. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just a mother protecting her child. This was a warrior, fighting with a ferocity that sent chills down his spine. But even Lyra had her limits. The soldiers were relentless, their firepower overwhelming. Ethan knew she couldn't hold them off forever. He needed to act. Gripping his makeshift weapon, he crept along the edge of the cave, his eyes scanning the soldiers for an opening. One of them had his back turned, his focus entirely on Lyra. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself, and lunged. The piece of metal struck the soldier's leg, and he cried out, stumbling forward. Ethan didn't hesitate, grabbing the soldier's fallen weapon and turning it on the others. He fired blindly, the recoil nearly knocking him over, but it was enough to draw their attention away from Lyra. She took the opportunity to strike, her claws ripping through the remaining soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Within moments, the cave was silent once more, the air thick with the smell of blood and scorched metal. Ethan leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. His hands were shaking, the weapon still clutched tightly in his grip. He glanced at Lyra, who stood in the center of the carnage, her glowing eyes scanning the area for any remaining threats. The child ran to her, chirping softly, and she knelt down to pull it close. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw something he hadn't expected: gratitude. She nodded slightly, a gesture that spoke volumes. They were in this together now, whether they liked it or not. As he sat down to catch his breath, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The enemy knew they were here. They would come again, and next time, they would bring more firepower. But for now, they had survived. And that was enough. The bond of survival. The cave was quiet now, save for the occasional drip of water echoing from the far walls. Ethan sat on a jagged rock, his back against the cool stone, staring at the faint, glowing vines that illuminated the space. His body ached from the earlier skirmish, but the pain was manageable. What weighed heavier was the realization of how close they'd come to being wiped out. Lyra sat across from him, her massive frame hunched slightly as she carefully tended to a deep gash on her arm. Her glowing eyes flicked to the child, who nestled close to her side, chirping softly. Ethan marveled at how gentle she was with her movements, even though her hands were large enough to crush a man without effort. For a while, neither of them spoke, or tried to. The silence wasn't awkward, though. It was the kind that came after surviving something terrible, the kind that didn't need words. Ethan broke it first. "You're incredible, you know that," he said, his voice low but sincere. He didn't expect a response, But to his surprise, Lyra paused her work and looked at him. Her head tilted slightly, a gesture he'd come to understand as curiosity. He chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "I mean, the way you fought back there. You didn't have to save me. Hell, you could have left me back on the battlefield, and no one would have blamed you." Lyra didn't reply, of course, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Ethan feel like she understood. Slowly, she raised her uninjured hand and tapped her chest twice, then gestured toward him. It was the same motion she'd used before, and while it wasn't much, Ethan felt its weight. She was saying they were connected. "Yeah," he said softly. "I get it. We're in this together now." The child chirped again, drawing Ethan's attention. It shuffled over to him, its small, clawed hands reaching out hesitantly. Ethan smiled and held out his own hand. The child touched it, its fingers curling around his. For a moment, he felt a warmth that wasn't just physical. It was trust. "You've got a brave kid," Ethan said, glancing at Lyra. "Takes after you." Lyra hummed softly, a low melodic sound that resonated in the cave. It wasn't a word, but it felt like agreement. As the hours passed, Ethan began to notice the subtle details of Lyra's world. The cave wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a sanctuary. The glowing vines weren't just for light. They emitted a faint warmth and a soothing hum that eased tension in his muscles. The pools of water tasted sweet and refreshing, and the strange fruits Lyra shared were unlike anything he'd ever had on Earth. Everything here seemed designed for survival, for nurturing life. Back on Earth, Ethan began, his voice thoughtful. "We have this saying, family is everything. I didn't always believe it. The military kind of pulls you away from all that. But seeing you too," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It makes me think I've been wrong. About a lot of things." Lyra listened, her glowing eyes fixed on him. For the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't just talking to an alien. He was talking to someone who understood loss, sacrifice, and the lengths one would go to protect the people they loved. "I lost my squad," he admitted after a long pause. The words felt heavy in his throat. "We were a team. My family, in a way. And now, it's just me." Lyra reached out then, her hand hovering near his shoulder. She didn't touch him, but the gesture was enough. Ethan felt an unexpected lump in his throat. "Thanks," he said quietly, looking away. He didn't want to cry in front of her. Whatever she thought of him, he didn't want to look weak. The moment was interrupted by a faint sound, a distant hum, low and rhythmic. Lyra stiffened instantly, her eyes narrowing. Ethan followed her gaze toward the cave's entrance. The child chirped nervously, pressing closer to its mother. "What is it?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. Lyra didn't need to speak. She rose to her full height, her claws flexing as she stepped toward the entrance. Ethan grabbed the weapon he'd taken from one of the soldiers earlier, his heart pounding. "They're not going to stop, are they?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Lyra glanced back at him, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her stance, in the way she positioned herself between him, the child, and the outside world, that told Ethan all he needed to know. No, the enemy wouldn't stop, not until they were all gone. Ethan stood, his body protesting but his resolve firm. "If they want a fight," he said, stepping up beside her, "we'll give them one." Lyra tilted her head, a faint hum escaping her. It wasn't fear, it was approval. They might have been from different worlds, but in this moment, they were the same, two protectors, standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time since the battle began, Ethan didn't feel alone. The final stand. The cave was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a battleground. The hum of approaching enemy forces grew louder, vibrating through the stone walls like a harbinger of doom. Ethan crouched behind a cluster of jagged rocks, his weapon gripped tightly in his hands. Beside him, Lyra loomed like a sentinel, her glowing eyes locked on the entrance. Her claws flexed in anticipation, and her tail twitched with a barely contained energy that radiated across the room. The child clung to her leg, its small frame trembling. Ethan felt a pang of guilt as he looked at the tiny creature. It didn't belong in a fight like this. None of them did. "How many do you think are out there?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Lyra didn't respond with words. Instead, she raised her hand, gesturing with 3 elongated fingers. 3 groups. 3 dozen. Ethan couldn't be sure, but either way, the odds weren't in their favor. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. "All right, we need a plan." Lyra tilted her head, as if waiting for him to continue. He swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear clawing at his chest. "We can't take them head on. Not all of them. But if we bottleneck them at the entrance, we might stand a chance." Lyra seemed to consider this, then nodded. She moved swiftly, her massive form gliding through the shadows as she prepared for the ambush. Ethan watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She wasn't just strong, she was tactical. Every movement was calculated, every step purposeful. Ethan turned to the child. "Stay hidden," he whispered, his tone firm but gentle. He pointed to a small alcove near the back of the cave. "No matter what happens, don't come out until it's safe." The child chirped softly, its wide eyes glistening with fear, but it obeyed. Ethan felt a pang in his chest as he watched it scurry away. Protecting that little one wasn't just Lyra's mission anymore. It was his too. Then the first drone entered the cave. Its sleek, black body hovered just above the ground, its red sensors scanning the room with eerie precision. Ethan held his breath, waiting for the right moment. The drone moved closer, its lights sweeping across the rocks. Lyra struck like lightning. Her claws sliced through the drone's casing, sending sparks flying as the machine crumpled to the ground. The noise was deafening, echoing through the cave like a thunderclap. "They know we're here now," Ethan muttered, gripping his weapon tighter. The ground trembled as more drones and soldiers poured into the entrance, their mechanical whirs and guttural shouts filling the air. Ethan didn't wait. He opened fire, the weapon kicking hard against his shoulder. The first soldier dropped, then another, but they kept coming, relentless and overwhelming. Lyra was a whirlwind of motion, her claws and tail striking with deadly precision. She moved with a ferocity that seemed almost primal, but there was a grace to it, too, a rhythm that spoke of years of survival and instinct. Ethan found himself matching her pace, his shots picking off targets she hadn't reached yet. But for every enemy they took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. The cave was quickly filling with smoke and chaos. Ethan's ears rang from the explosions, his muscles screaming in protest as he ducked and dodged incoming fire. "We can't hold them off forever," he shouted over the noise, glancing at Lyra. She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed a piece of broken alien tech from the ground, a glowing, disc-shaped device, and hurled it toward the entrance. The device detonated with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave that knocked the incoming soldiers off their feet. The cave walls shook, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. Ethan coughed, waving the smoke away from his face. "That was impressive," he muttered, before realizing the explosion had only bought them a few seconds. The enemy was regrouping outside, preparing for another wave. Lyra turned to him then, her glowing eyes narrowing. She pointed to the child's hiding spot, then to the tunnel at the back of the cave. The message was clear: get the child and run. "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not leaving you." Lyra growled softly, a sound that was more frustration than anger. She stepped closer, towering over him, and jabbed a clawed finger toward the tunnel again. Ethan met her gaze, his jaw set. "We both know you can't fight them all alone," he said, "and I'm not about to abandon you." For a moment, they stared at each other, the tension thick. Then Lyra exhaled sharply, her posture relaxing just slightly. She nodded, a reluctant acceptance. "All right," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Let's finish this, together." The next wave came fast, a torrent of drones and heavily armed soldiers flooding the entrance. Ethan and Lyra moved as one, their attacks coordinated and precise. Ethan's shots covered Lyra's flanks, while her raw power cleared the path ahead. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but for the first time, Ethan felt something close to hope. As the last of the enemies fell, silence settled over the cave. Ethan's chest heaved as he lowered his weapon, his hands trembling. Lyra stood beside him, her massive frame outlined by the faint glow of the vines. Her breathing was heavy, but her eyes still burned with determination. They had won, for now. Ethan glanced toward the alcove where the child was hiding. It peeked out cautiously, its wide eyes scanning the room. When it saw them, it chirped excitedly and ran to Lyra, wrapping its small arms around her leg. Ethan sank to the ground, his back against the rock. He let out a shaky laugh, the adrenaline finally beginning to wear off. "We make a pretty good team," he said, looking up at Lyra. She didn't respond, but her faint hum of approval was enough. As Ethan sat there, catching his breath, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about protecting the bond they'd forged, a bond stronger than any language, any species, or any war. And he wasn't going to let anything break it. A new beginning. The air was crisp and still, carrying a faint hum of life that felt unfamiliar yet comforting. Ethan stood at the edge of a vast, open expanse, the jagged cliffs of the cave now a distant memory. The battlefield and its horrors seemed a lifetime away, though the scars, both on his body and in his mind, remained. Behind him, the child chirped playfully, chasing a small, glowing insect that darted through the tall, silver-tipped grass. Lyra stood nearby, her towering frame silhouetted against the twin suns dipping low on the horizon. The light bathed her in a soft, golden glow, emphasizing the protective stance she still carried, even in this newfound peace. Ethan took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a refreshing coolness he hadn't felt in months. It wasn't Earth, but it was safe. For now, that was enough. The journey to this place had been grueling. After the battle in the cave, Ethan and Lyra had fled deeper into the wilderness, evading the relentless pursuit of enemy forces. Each day had been a test of endurance, strategy, and trust. They'd navigated treacherous terrain, fended off predators, and relied on one another in ways Ethan never imagined he could with someone, or something, from another world. But as much as the journey had been physical, it had also been emotional. Somewhere along the way, the fear and suspicion that once colored their alliance had melted into something else. Understanding, respect, maybe even something close to friendship. Ethan, Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned, surprised as always by how her voice resonated, not in the air, but in his chest. It wasn't speech in the human sense, but over time, he had come to understand the patterns, the tones. It was as if her words bypassed language altogether, speaking directly to his instincts. "What's up?" he asked, his lips curving into a faint smile. She gestured toward the child, who was now perched atop a low, moss-covered rock, staring up at the sky. Lyra's movements were slower now, more deliberate. For the first time, she seemed at ease, her body language less guarded. Ethan followed her gaze upward. The stars were beginning to appear, their light scattered across the velvet sky. It was a view Ethan had only ever seen from space, but here, on this alien world, it felt impossibly vast and close at the same time. "They'll come for us again, won't they?" he said, his voice quiet. Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the stars. Then, with a soft hum, she raised her hand and pointed to a cluster of bright lights near the horizon. Ethan recognized it instantly. It was the constellation that marked the location of Earth, faint but unmistakable. "Home," he murmured, his chest tightening. It was a word that felt foreign now. The idea of going back to Earth, to his old life, seemed impossibly distant. He had changed too much, seen too much, Would it even feel like home anymore? Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. She tapped her chest, then gestured toward him and the child, before sweeping her hand across the horizon. The gesture was clear. This is home now. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected to feel this way, to look at an alien planet and think of it as anything but foreign. But as he stood there, the child's laughter echoing in the background, Lyra's quiet strength beside him, he realized she was right. Home wasn't a place. It was the people you fought for, the ones who stood by you when everything else fell apart. The child ran toward them then, clutching a small, glowing flower it had plucked from the grass. It chirped excitedly, holding it up for Ethan to see. He crouched down, smiling as he took the delicate bloom. "Beautiful," he said, his voice warm. "Just like you." The child chirped again, its wide eyes gleaming with joy. Lyra watched them, her gaze softening. Ethan caught her expression and felt a wave of gratitude. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was living. "We'll protect this place," Ethan said, standing and looking out at the horizon. "No matter what it takes. For you, for the kid, and for everyone who comes after us." Lyra nodded, her towering frame a symbol of unyielding strength. Together, they had faced impossible odds and found something far greater than victory. Purpose. As the suns finally dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a serene twilight, Ethan, Lyra, and the child stood together, their shadows blending into one. The galaxy still held its dangers, its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something he thought he'd lost forever.